Hi, this is either the second, third, or fourth part of this video, so you don't necessarily have to watch all four parts, but if you want to, here is your warning. This is not the first part. Links in the description for all four videos, hopefully.
So I guess there's two things lacking when it comes to representation of minorities. There's good representation and there's representation at all. So I guess how would you is bad representation better than no representation at all, or how do you balance those two things?
Well, good representation and bad representation are very subjective concepts.
Yeah.
What one person might think is a very positive portrayal, others would think, oh my God, that's just awful. For example, Heart of Darkness by Joseph Conrad, for a very long time, used to be considered an indictment of colonialism and its racial implications. But as we read it in a more modern lens, we recognize it's not necessarily an indictment of racism, because it promotes that racism. That racism, the idea that Africans are less than their European counterparts, is not challenged at all. It's just there.
Yeah.
So the idea that there's good representation and bad representation, I think, is a false dichotomy. I think that no representation is a bad thing. That's just a tragedy in and of itself. So let's just immediately take that off the table.
Yeah.
In my mind, the two forms of representation that we have working for us is the kind where, okay, you have an asexual character and they come out and say they're asexual. So that's the one kind. And then you have another asexual character, but they don't say they're asexual. For example, Dumbledore in Harry Potter. We could completely read Dumbledore in Harry Potter as asexual if we wanted to. It's only because J.K. Rowling says Dumbledore is gay that he's gay.
Yeah.
But canonically, there's no reason to believe he's gay.
No.
Right? So in that regard, I would rather have representation that is expansive, in the sense that if you're going to have an asexual character, don't just have that asexual character say, okay, I'm asexual, and that's the end of it.
Yeah.
In order to be representative, you need to extend that asexuality into the narrative itself, into the dialogue, into the various interactions that this character has with the world around it, with other characters. There needs to be some sense that you are not just ticking off a box and saying, well, I have one asexual now. Let's move on to the next underrepresented character, and that be the end of it. Because that's not really true representation. That's just, hey, I want to say I have an asexual character in my book. So I would say avoid that kind of representation. But
yeah.
For writers who are writing, I personally, I've written 3 books. I have never written an asexual character. I find it a little, I don't know, I find it very difficult to integrate that into the narrative. Now, that's not saying it's impossible. That's more a statement on my abilities as a writer. I wouldn't want to personally write an asexual character and release that out into the world and have it do more harm than good.
I think.
Yeah.
Say if you wanted to write a gay character, you could have them like have a boyfriend or have like be interested in guys just, I don't know, aesthetically, or want to date them, that kind of thing. And I suppose it's quite easy to implement. But if you want to have an asexual character, you automatically have to talk about sex. I think because, well, it's just it's tricky even talking about it. Apparently, I think it's just more difficult to implement an asexual character, because without explicitly talking about sex, it's not going to be mentioned. If that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Yeah, I think that's a very real obstacle. And I think the cleverer artists are going to come up with ways to integrate asexual characters with an asexual narrative that don't necessarily involve sex. So, like, take for example the gay characters in literature. There is a sort of shift now in homosexual representation in media. Before, it was very much about sex, and there was a very common trope of the coming out story. But now it's kind of shifting. People are aware that there are gay characters in works. People are aware that there are gay people in the real world, and that they're not necessarily evil and the boogeyman. So you have narratives where you have a gay character who is in a relationship with a man, and there is no coming out story. It's just he's gay, he's in a relationship with this man, and that's that. And I know that does upset a lot of people because they want the coming out stories. They want the cookie cutter gay character to sort of, evolve on sex. But I think that there not only is room for these kinds of stories, but it's essential. If the art does not evolve, the art dies. So I think the best example that I can think of is, are you familiar with this? There's a cartoon called Voltron.
I'm familiar with it. Yeah, I haven't watched it myself though.
Yeah, there's a character who's gay, but it does interact with his narrative a little bit, but there's no scene of him coming out saying, "Hey, I'm gay," or "Hey guys, I have a boyfriend who, spoiler alert, died." You don't get that narrative. Instead, you get some very brief snippets into this relationship that he had, where he chose between his military career and his love life with this man. It's absolutely no different than a relationship you'd see if it were a woman.
Yeah.
If he were straight and in a relationship with a woman, and he chose his military career over this relationship with a woman. So I think that representation is really helpful, because it shows people that, this gay character goes through something very similar to us as a straight person. It provides an access point that allows for people who are not necessarily a part of the community to access the community.
Yeah, and
We need something like that for asexuality.
And I think in a sense it normalizes it, because if every time you see a gay character, it's the coming out story. If every time they're part of that, like, typically gay story, then they're still othered in a sense. It's still a gay character, not a character who is gay. So I think that having both coming out stories, which are definitely important, and gay characters who are being gay is just another part of a multifaceted character, is definitely important.
Yeah, and there are so many facets of that journey that just don't get explored often enough. I feel, in media, and for example, there's a very bizarre debate about the concept of rape by deception and whether someone who is LGBTQIA and knows they are LGBTQIA but sleeps with, say, a man who is gay, sleeps with a woman to try and maintain the appearance that he's straight, does that fall under the category of rape by deception?
Mm.
And there are states where there are laws against rape by deception. So that debate has real world consequences.
Mm.
I'd like to see narratives explore that and kind of, you know, flesh out that area and allow us to have a real conversation about, how dangerous, some of these thoughts are, rather than just going with the simple narrative of, okay, I'm going to come out. Oh, I'm worried my parents aren't going to be okay with it. We've seen that 1,000 times over again.
Mm.
It's okay to have that, but we also need, to evolve. We need to have and explore new areas.
Yeah. And I mean, at this point, it would definitely be nice to see mainstream asexual representation, full stop, whether that be, and I suppose at that point it would start with the whole coming out and the analogous to the gay one. Like Love, Simon was the biggest one I know of, and a similar thing for an asexual character I think would definitely be beneficial, whether in literature or otherwise.
Yeah. And I think once we start getting those narratives, and right now there are a lot of asexual characters in like young adult literature. I'm hoping that that's going to expand as that audience grows. As the audience ages, we're going to get, less, well, maybe not less young adult literature with asexuals in it, but, narratives that have asexuals in it that are targeted toward adults, toward older teens, toward college students. So I think that's very much so going to happen. We can already see that trend occurring. I'm hoping that with the research that we're going to uncover works that existed prior to the 50s that have asexual characters or asexual connotations to them that can be interpreted that way. Because that way, I remember when I was in undergrad and I wanted to write a paper on the asexual qualities of a character in an anime. My professor just like flat out laughed me out of the classroom. Like, no, you're not writing about that. You pick a regular subject and a regular work. And like, okay. So I didn't write about it. But the first thing that you have to do with any research is defend it.
Yeah.
And right now, that's kind of what I'm doing. Just formulating a foundation, pointing out some areas where there is reason to believe that these characters are asexual. And that way, when someone wants to write a paper in an undergrad classroom, they can point to an essay that I might have published where I identify a character from I don't know, the Renaissance as asexual. Or there's a wonderful essay written by Megan Arkenberg about asexuality in the Middle Ages. So there's really some fascinating reads out there. And if we can develop enough of a scholarship around this subject, I think students who are writing papers in high school or as undergrads who are asexual and want to research something that's more representative of them, they'll have the ability to do that. And when a professor says, well, what research is out there for them, they can point to, well, this is out there and this essay and this book, and they can point to source material that will help them defend that topic.
Yeah, well, I wish you the best of luck with that, because it sounds like, well, any sort of research around asexuality is going to be invaluable because there's so little of it.
If you enjoyed this and want to see the other parts of the interview, I'll be putting the other videos in the description and in a playlist. So if you want to watch the whole of it, then feel free. If you enjoyed this video, then please leave a like. I post videos every Saturday, so if you want to see more, then feel free to subscribe. That is all I had to say today. Have a wonderful day, and I shall see you next time.